"Your chief said you were looking for a place to die," she whispered, her dark eyes steady on the soldier, standing in the doorway. "He said you'd already chosen the mountain." Gideon Harp did not answer right away. That was the thing about him, he never answered right away. He had a way of letting silence do the work first, of standing inside a question, the way other men stood inside a burning room, still and patient and unafraid. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "He shouldn't have told you that." "He tells me everything," she said. "He always has." And that was how it started. Not with the gunshot or a handshake or a letter carried on horseback through 3 counties. It started with a woman standing at the edge of a stranger's porch, suitcase at her feet, the Colorado autumn burning gold behind her, telling a man she had never met exactly what his plan was, and not flinching when he didn't deny it. Her name was Seneca Crow. She was 27 years old, and she had ridden 2 days from the Ute encampment near the Uncompahgre River alone with nothing but that suitcase, a hunting knife her father had given her when she was 9, and a message she was not entirely sure she believed in delivering. But she had come anyway. That's the part worth remembering. She had come anyway. Gideon Harp had not always been a man who chose mountains to die on. Once, and this was before the war, before the ambush at Cimarron Creek, before the particular kind of silence that follows you home and never leaves, he had been the kind of man who laughed easily. His mother used to say he had his father's mouth, which meant he was always smiling at something, even when there was nothing to smile at. He had a younger brother named Ellis who followed him everywhere like a shadow that had forgotten to be afraid. Ellis was dead now. So was the laughing. Gideon had come to the mountain cabin in the fall of 1873 with one intention, to winter there and not come out in spring. He had not told anyone this. He had told his commanding officer he was taking land in Colorado for farming. He had told his landlady in Denver he was going north to trap. He had told no one the truth because the truth was not the kind of thing you told people. It sat in your chest like a stone and you carried it, and you did not explain it to anyone because they would try to take it from you, and you had decided the stone was yours to keep. Chief Ouray knew. That was the strange part. That was the part Gideon never fully understood. How a man he had met only twice, briefly, over trade negotiations that had nothing to do with either of them personally, had looked at him in that particular way and known. The second time they met, Ouray had said, simply and quietly, with the calm of a man who had buried too many things to be surprised by grief anymore, "You are going somewhere alone to finish something." Gideon had said nothing, which was, in its own way, an answer. What he did not expect was that Ouray would send someone after him. Seneca set her suitcase just inside the door because Gideon had not invited her in, but also had not told her to leave, and in her experience, silence in a doorway was an invitation of a kind. The cabin was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a wood stove that needed cleaning, a rifle on the wall, a bedroll on a cot in the corner. There were no photographs, no letters, nothing personal on any surface. A man had come here to leave everything behind, and he had done a thorough job of it. She had seen rooms like this before. Her father's study, after her mother died, had looked exactly this way, stripped of everything soft, every softness being a reminder of what was gone. "Sit down," Gideon said finally, and he said it to himself as much as to her, because he sat at the table first, heavily like a man who had been standing for too long. She sat across from him. For a moment neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind came through the pines in long rolling waves, and somewhere up the ridge a hawk was calling. "How long ago did he send you?" Gideon asked. 4 days, she said. "I waited 2 before I left. I wasn't sure I was going to come. What changed your mind?" She looked at him carefully. There was something in his face that reminded her of the river in late autumn. Still on the surface, but moving hard underneath, too fast and too cold to cross safely. She had learned, growing up between 2 worlds, between her mother's Ute people and her father's trading post on the edge of Montrose, to read faces the way other children read primers. Faces told you the things people were working hard not to say. His face said, "I am very tired." "He told me what happened at Cimarron Creek," she said. Gideon went very still. He said you carried 3 men out of that river back. That's not what I asked, Gideon said. His voice was quiet. Not hard, just quiet, the way a door is quiet when it has been shut firmly. No, she said, it's not. She folded her hands on the table. What changed my mind was that my father asked me. He has asked me for very little in my life. He asked me for this. Another silence. The hawk called again. What exactly did he ask you to do? Gideon said. To come here, she said, to stay for a while, to make sure you ate something. She paused. He didn't say for how long. Gideon looked at her for so long that she thought he was going to ask her to leave after all. She had prepared herself for that. She had even planned what she would say. Something quiet, something that didn't shame either of them, and then she would pick up her suitcase and go, and she would tell her father she had tried, and they would both carry that in whatever way people carry the things they could not fix. But instead he stood up and went to the stove and began building a fire. There's only one cot, he said. I've slept on worse than a floor, she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't tell her to leave. That was the first night. She cooked. That surprised him. He had expected, he was not sure what he had expected. Something ceremonial, perhaps, something that announced itself. He had heard men talk about Ouray's people, the way men talked about things they did not understand, with a mixture of fear and false reverence that was really just fear wearing a different coat. He had carried some of that with him without knowing it, the way you carry dust on your boots. What he had not expected was a woman who woke before dawn and found his one good skillet, and made cornbread from the meal he had stored in a tin, who located his coffee without asking and made it strong, who set a plate in front of him without ceremony, as if feeding someone was simply a thing you did in the morning, like breathing. He ate. He had not been eating much. He was aware of this the way you are aware of a wound you have decided to let go, distantly, with a kind of grim recognition that it is there and you are choosing not to address it. The cornbread was good. He ate 2 pieces and didn't say anything. My father taught me, Seneca said, as if he had asked. She was eating her own piece, looking out the window at the pine-dark ridge. My mother's people ate differently. But he said a woman should know how to feed people, and I figured he was right about that even if he was wrong about other things. What was he wrong about? Gideon asked before he could stop himself. She glanced at him with something that might have been surprise or might have been amusement. It was brief, whatever it was. He thought my brother would stay, she said. He didn't. Where did he go? California, she said. Same place everyone goes when they're running away from something, and want to call it ambition. She said it without bitterness, was just matter-of-factly, the way you state a thing that has had time to become simply true. Gideon thought of Ellis without meaning to. Ellis at 17 saying, I'm going to go west and make something. Ellis at 19 enlisting because he wanted to be where Gideon was. Ellis at 21, face down in the Cimarron riverbed in the dark, and Gideon's hands on his back, pushing, and the word come on said. So many times it stopped meaning anything. He put his fork down. Seneca looked at him, but she didn't ask. She just let it sit there in the room between them. The grief that had risen to the surface for a moment and then gone back under. She did not try to drain it or name it or make it smaller. She just let it be there. That was the second thing that surprised him. The days took on a shape neither of them had planned. Gideon split wood in the mornings. Seneca organized what passed for a pantry. He was a man who had been ignoring the practical details of survival, which told you something about where his attention was, and she set about correcting this without ever making a point of it. She repaired the gap in the window frame he hadn't noticed until the cold came in sideways. She found where he'd left his second pair of boots and cleaned them and set them by the door. She was not domestic in a way that diminished her. There was nothing servile in any of it. She moved through the cabin the way she moved through everything else, with a quiet competence that belonged entirely to herself. In the afternoons she walked, always alone, always up toward the ridge and back, sometimes with her hunting knife in her belt, sometimes without. She never told him where she went, and he never asked, But he watched for her return. He noticed that about himself and said nothing. On the 5th day, he asked her about her father. "He trades," she said. "Has for 30 years. Horses, mostly. Some goods. He knows everyone in 3 territories." She paused. "He knew your unit's captain. That's how he knew about Cimarron." "Thompson," Gideon said. "Yes." Gideon turned that over. "Thompson's a good man," he said. "He shouldn't have." He stopped. "Talked about what happened," Seneca said, not unkindly. "Spread it around," Gideon said. "He told my father because he was worried about you," she said, "because you left Denver without telling anyone and no one knew where you'd gone. And my father knew because he had heard about the cabin, knew it had been empty for 3 winters." She looked at him steadily. He put it together. Gideon looked at the fire for a long time. "How many people know?" he said. "My father," she said. "Me." She let that sit for a moment. "That's all." He nodded once, slowly, as if he were putting something down that had been very heavy. The thing about living alongside grief, and Seneca knew this better than most, is that it does not leave all at once. It leaves the way winter leaves. Slowly, then in a rush you weren't prepared for, then slowly again. There are mornings when you wake up and the light comes in through the window, and for 2 whole seconds you forget what you are carrying, and then you remember, and the remembering is its own kind of loss on top of the first one. But sometimes, between the forgetting and the remembering, there is just the light. And the light is enough for 2 seconds, and after a while 2 seconds becomes 5, and then 10. That was what was happening to Gideon Harp, in the high country above the Uncompahgre, in a cabin he had come to in order to disappear. He was not disappearing. He was, very slowly against his will, becoming present again. He could feel it happening, and he didn't know what to do with it. Every morning Seneca made coffee. Every evening she sat with a book she had brought in her suitcase, old, cloth-covered, its title worn off the spine, and read in the last of the light before darkness came. She never talked at him. She never tried to chisel him open or offer him the particular brand of comfort that is really just discomfort, redirected. She just existed in the same space, which was somehow the most disarming thing she could have done. On the 8th day, he sat down across from her while she was reading. She looked up. "I had a brother," he said. "His name was Ellis." She put the book down. She did not say "I know" or "I'm sorry" or anything that would have made him stop. She just looked at him with those dark, steady eyes and waited. He talked for a long time. He told her about Ellis following him into the army, about trying to keep him out of the worst postings, about Cimarron Creek, and the ambush in the dark, and the 3 men he had pulled out and the one he had not. He told her about the way Ellis had looked at him when they were boys. Like Gideon was the answer to a question, Ellis was always asking. He told her about the silence after, and Denver, and the drinking he had done in Denver that he was not proud of, and the morning he had woken up in a boarding house and understood with complete clarity that he did not know a single good reason to get dressed. He did not cry. He had not cried since Cimarron. He was not sure he knew how anymore. But when he finished talking, Seneca said quietly, "He sounds like he was easy to love." And something in Gideon's chest broke apart in a way that was not pain exactly. Or not only pain, it was more like a wall that had been under too much pressure for too long, finally giving way. Not collapsing, not catastrophically, but releasing, settling. He put his face in his hands for a moment. Just a moment. She did not touch him. She did not move. She let him have the moment entirely for himself. That was when he understood something about her that he hadn't found language for until then. She had an extraordinary gift for knowing what a person needed and not substituting something easier. She had been there 12 days when he asked her about the knife. She had it out on the table, cleaning it, and he watched her hands, the same careful attention she brought to everything, and asked where it had come from. "My father gave it to me when I was 9, she said. "Why 9? "My mother died that winter," she said. "He didn't know how to say what he wanted to say, so he gave me the knife." She turned it in her hands. "I think he meant, 'You can take care of yourself.' I think he meant, 'I know you can.'" She set it down. He was not always able to say the things he meant. He was better with objects. Gideon thought about that. Most men are, he said. She looked at him then with something that was definitely amusement this time, unhidden, a real thing. Yes, she said, you are. He almost smiled. It surprised him so much that he stopped it. But she had already seen the almost of it, and she didn't say anything, just looked back down at the knife. But the almost was there. He felt it. What country are you listening from today? I want to know who's out there in the dark with us, carrying their own stones, their own winters. Leave it in the comments. We'll keep going. On the 14th day, it snowed. Not the light, early-season snow that melts by afternoon, but the real kind, deep and silent and committed, the kind that changes the shape of the world and means it. By midday, the ridge had disappeared. By evening, the pines were bowed under the weight of it, and the cabin had contracted to its firelit self, close and warm and cut off from everything. They played cards. Gideon found a deck in a coat pocket he hadn't worn in months, and Seneca had never played the particular game he knew, but she learned it in 3 hands, and by the 6th she was taking his last match from him with a composure that he found both impressive and annoying. He said so. She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, really laugh, not just the almost smile she gave his dry remarks, but a genuine sound, surprised out of her. It changed her face completely. It made her younger and older at the same time, somehow. It made her real in a way she had already been real, but differently now. He sat back and looked at her, and she was still smiling when she looked up and saw him looking. Neither of them said anything. The fire settled. Gideon picked up the cards and shuffled them. Another hand, he said. You'll lose again, she said. Probably, he said. They played until the fire burned low, and the snow was still falling, and neither of them suggested stopping. She had been there 3 weeks when he found her on the porch before dawn. He woke to the cold that comes with an open door and pulled on his boots and found her sitting on the top step, wrapped in her coat, watching the dark mountains against the dark sky, the line between them invisible. He sat down beside her without asking. After a while she said, I have to go back. He had known it was coming. He had been knowing it was coming for several days in the way you know a storm is coming from the way the birds go quiet. He did not say I know or when right away. He let it be said first. My father will be needing help with the winter trading, she said. And I've been here longer than I told him I'd be. How long did you tell him? A week, she said. Gideon looked at her. You've been here 3, yes. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the mountains. Why? He asked. She was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that means someone is deciding how honest to be. Because you weren't done, she finally said. He understood what she meant. He understood it the way you understand something that has been true for a while before you had language for it. She had come because her father asked her to. She had stayed because something in her had recognized, the way people who have lived alongside loss can recognize, that he was balanced on an edge and that the edge was narrower than anyone knew, and that sometimes all it takes is one person being unhurried about leaving. Seneca, he said. She turned to look at him. The mountains were beginning to show at their edges, the dark separating from the dark. He could see her face in the first pale gray of it, the steadiness that was her, the patience she had never performed for him, just been. He didn't know what he had been about to say. Several things had gathered at once. Thank you and don't go, and I don't know what I am now, but I know it's different, and I'm sorry I came here to disappear. And none of them came out quite right when sorted, so he said none of them. What he did was reach over very slowly and cover her hand with his. She looked down at his hand, then back up at him. You'll write, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. To my father, she added, and there was the amusement again, underneath the words, low and warm. To you, he said. She turned her hand under his and held it. They sat that way until the mountains came all the way back from the dark, peak by peak, ridge by ridge, returning to themselves in the light. She left that morning. She packed her suitcase with the same efficient quiet she had brought to everything else. She did not make it dramatic. She was not a woman who made things more than they were, and she was not a woman who made them less. At the porch, she stopped and turned back. Gideon, she said. He was leaning against the door frame, watching her. My father was right about you, she said. He said you were worth the ride. She picked up the suitcase. He's usually right about people. She walked down the path toward where her horse was tied, and he watched her until the pines folded her into themselves and she was gone. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he went inside and built up the fire and found a sheet of paper in the bottom of his pack. The same pack he had come here with, the one he had not planned on needing much longer. He smoothed it on the table, found a pencil. He sat there for a while thinking about what to say. He thought about Ellis, about the way grief had stopped being a stone and started being not light, not yet, but something different, something that had edges you could feel without being cut by them. He thought about 3 weeks of mornings and coffee and cards in the snow and a woman who had never once treated his darkness as a problem to be solved, only as weather to be waited out alongside. He wrote 2 words first, "Dear Seneca," then he stopped. Let that be there for a moment on the page. Then he wrote, "I'm still here." He put the pencil down and looked at what he had written. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. Gold in the upper pines, a jay calling somewhere on the ridge, the snow bright and ordinary and real. I'm still here. 3 words, not much, and everything. He picked up the pencil and kept writing.